Hey, it's Medium Jenny Lee. I'm here with the next Raw Contact book discussion. We're on session 23, which means this is going to be video number 24. Moving right along. Okay. Can you tell me why you went to Egypt? At the time of which you speak, there are those who chose to worship the hawk-eyed sun god, Horus. This vibrational sound complex has taken other vibrational sound complexes, the object of worship being the sun disk represented in sun distortion. We were drawn to spend some time, as you would call it, scanning the peoples for a serious interest amounting to a seeking with which we might help without infringement. We found that at that time the social complex was quite self-contradictory in its so-called religious beliefs, and therefore was not an appropriate calling for a vibration. Thus, at that time, which you know is approximately 18,000 years ago, we departed without taking action. So the fact that they're starting to worship and believe in and think about and focus their attention on the sun god Horus, it grabbed their attention, grabbed Ra's attention. They came and checked it out, but there's a lot of self-contradictory things happening. So they left. That was 18,000 years ago. Were the Egyptian entities able to see you in the skies? Correct. What did they see? They saw crystal-powered bell-shaped craft. So that would be interesting to look up and see if there's any depictions of that in hieroglyphics and whatnot. But I'm not going to do that right now. I already looked up a lot of stuff for this one. I should have looked that up previously. This did not affect them due to their firm conviction that many wondrous things occurred as a normal part of a world, as you call it, which many deities had powerful control over supernatural events. So they didn't think too much of it because they were used to seeing weird stuff or experiencing weird stuff. So did you have a reason for being visible? Correct. Why? We allowed visibility because it did not make any difference, because they were used to supernatural things. Can you answer the same questions I've just had in respect to your next attempt? So the 11,000 years ago. The next attempt was prolonged. It occurred over a period of time. The nexus or center of our efforts was a decision upon our parts that there was a sufficient calling to attempt to walk among your peoples as brothers. We laid this plan before the Council of Saturn, offering ourselves as service-oriented wanderers of a type which, landing directly upon the inner planes without incarnative processes, thus we emerged or materialized in physical chemical complexes representing as closely as possible our natures. This effort being to appear as brothers, to spend a limited amount of time as the teachers of Law of One, for there was an ever stronger interest in the sun body, and this vibrates in concordance with our particular distortions. Whew! Ra gets a lot of words in there. So they laid out their plan to the Council of Saturn, that they were going to be service to others, come as a wanderer. They're not going to incarnate. They're going to materialize in a physical body that resembles what their nature of physical bodies was. Remember, a long time ago in one of the further sessions, they said that they had gold skin and they were tall and thin. Tall and thin, gold-skinned entities. And it's because they were having this stronger interest and concordance with Ra's particular distortions towards the sun body, like worshiping the sun. We discovered that for each word we uttered, there was 30 impressions we gave by our very being, which confused those entities we had come to serve. After a short period, we removed ourselves from these entities and spent much time attempting to understand how best to serve those to whom we had offered ourselves in love and light. So it sounds like stuff got really confusing. For every word, there was 30 different impressions. And remember, their appearance confused and baffled them too. So it sounds like the whole ordeal was kind of confusing. The ones who were in contact with the geographical entity which you know as Atlantis had conceived of the potentials for healing by use of the pyramid-shaped entities. In considering this and making adjustments for the differences and the distortion complexes of the two geographical cultures, as you call them, we went before the council again, offering this plan to the council as an aid to the healing and longevity of those in the area of Egypt. In this way, we hope to facilitate the learning process as well as offering philosophy articulating the law of one. Again, the council was approved. So another entity from the council, or another entity from the Confederation, had gone to Atlantis, you know, many previous years before, and they did the pyramid thing, and it turned out okay for a while. So Ra wanted to try that, but with the Egyptians. So then 11,000 years ago, we entered by thought form. But then they changed the years. So for all this time, they've been saying 11,000 years ago, but now they've changed it to 8,500 years ago, which actually makes a little bit more sense when the things that come up soon come up. So even though previously they've said 11,000 years ago multiple times, Ra's now changed it to 8,500 years, which that's probably the biggest amount of errors that occur in this information, is the amount of time, the years. Let's see. So, having considered these concepts carefully, we returned, never having left in thought, to the thought form areas of your vibrational planetary complex, and considered for some of your years, as you measure time, how to appropriately build these structures. So instead of 11,000 years ago, 8,500 years ago, they came back as thought forms and trying to figure out how they could build the pyramids. So then in the 6,000 years ago, the Great Pyramid was formed. So it took them 1,500 years to figure out how to build it. That's a long time. Then, in sequence, after this performing by thought of the building of the structure of the Great Pyramid using local or earthly material rather than thought form material to build other pyramid structures, they continued approximately 1,500 years. So between 6,000 years ago and 4,500 years ago, they're building these pyramids. The first one's the Great Pyramid, which is built with thought. The other were built with actual earth materials, and it's between those particular years. Meanwhile, the information concerning initiation, healing by crystal were given. The one known as Akhenaten was able to perceive this information without significant distortion, and for a time moved heaven and earth in order to invoke the law of one and to order the priesthood of these structures in accordance with the distortions of the initiation and true compassionate healing. This was not to be long-lasting. At this entity's physical dissolution from the third density physical plane, our teachings became quickly perverted, our structures returning once again to those called royal, and those with distortions toward power. All right, so I looked up a whole bunch of information about Akhenaten. So this is going to be some very interesting backup information. Okay, so Akhenaten was born 3,353 years in the past from 1981. So the years that Ra's giving are really close to, but not lining up all the way. So 8,500 years ago, they come back to Earth as thought forms. They put in a game plan of how they're going to build these pyramids. It's 6,000 years ago, they build a Great Pyramid. For another 1,500 years, they're building more pyramids. And then it takes like another 1,000 years before Akhenaten is born. This is a long amount of time in our physical time-space continuum. But there's a lot of information about him. Okay, so he was born 1372 BC, and he died in 1336 BC. He was the 10th ruler of the 18th dynasty, and he has a different name. So his pharaoh name is Amenhotep IV. And you might know who he is because he was married to Nefertiti. Nefertiti is a very famous Egyptian figure. So even if you had never heard of Amenhotep IV or Akhenaten, you probably have heard of Nefertiti. So we're talking about like some big name people here. Okay, so this is historical evidence, not coming from Ra, things that I've looked up. He abandoned polytheism and introduced Atenism, which was the worship of Aten. So a monotheistic religion. So all of that is true. Ra said it was, and it is. After he died, the belief was reversed. His monuments were dismantled. His name was excluded by later pharaohs from the list of rulers. Everything moved back to polytheism. And this part is really crazy. He was discredited and referred to as the enemy or that criminal. Poor Akhenaten. He's trying to spread the law of one. He's been given all this amazing, great information about how to heal people and move people up into the next density. And it only lasts for his lifetime, which clearly no one around him believed or thought that he was right. And then as soon as he dies, it just all goes back. And they slander him and make him seem like he's some crazy person. Wow. It's awful. Okay. Where were we here? We have a lot more to discuss. When you spoke of the pyramid healing, I'm assuming that the primary healing was for the mind. That's partly correct. The healing must be funneled without significant distortions of the in-streaming through the spiritual complex into the tree of the mind, which I still don't really understand what that means. Tree of the mind. There are parts in the mind which block energies flowing to the body complex. In each case, in each entity, the blockage may well differ. So everybody's blockages might be different. First, it is necessary to activate the sense of spirit, the spiritual channel. Then whether the blockage is from spiritual to mental, or from mental to physical, or whether it simply be a random, purely physical trauma, healing may then be carried out. So, remember Dawn's question was, is the healing primary of the mind? No, it could be any combination of things. It's different for each person, but the way that you start healing is through an activation of the spiritual channel. All right. When you started building the pyramid at Giza using thought, were you at that time in contact with incarnate Egyptians? And did they observe this building? Good question, Don. Good question. They were not in close contact with incarnate entities. We were responding to a general calling of sufficient energy in this particular location to merit action. We sent thoughts to all who were seeking our information. The appearance of the pyramid was a matter of tremendous surprise. However, it was carefully designed to coincide with the incarnation of one known as a great architect. This entity was later made into a deity, and in part due to this occurrence. Who was it? It's Imhotep. So they built the first Great Pyramid with thought, without anybody seeing it being built. And it was a complete shock and surprise to the people of Egypt that it just happened to be there. So that's pretty much what the Orion group did with the Easter Island heads. But that didn't really work. And here we are, Ra's doing it with the giant, massive Great Pyramid. But they did it perfectly in time with someone who actually was incarnate, who was known as a great architect, who later became a deity, so that they kind of wouldn't get the credit for it on purpose. So, the pyramids for the purpose were basically unsuccessful in that they didn't produce the rise in consciousness that you hoped for, but there must have been some success. We ask you to remember that we are brothers and sisters of sorrow. When one has been rescued from that sorrow to the vision of the one Creator, then there is no concept of failure. Our difficulty lay in the honor and responsibility of correcting the distortions of the law of one which occurred during our attempts to aid these entities. The distortions are seen as responsibilities rather than failures. The few who were inspired to seek are only hold on a second. The few who were inspired to seek are only reason for the attempt. So they really don't look at anything as a failure, because it's all part of the learning, growing process, even for them. So if one, remember they said this before, if one person moves up, learns something, is ascended in some way because of anything that they've done, they consider it a success. Just even one soul. But they've said many times, and they say it again, they stayed here all this time to try to fix the stuff that they did, that did go wrong with their attempts to help us. Thus, we would perhaps be in the position of a paradox in that, as one saw an illumination, we were what you call successful. And as others become more sorrowful and confused, we were failures. These are your terms. We persist in seeking to serve. So in the human eyes, they succeeded and failed, but to them, they're still just working towards the ultimate goal, trying to get everybody ascended. Here comes this damn Henry Puharich guy again. And I've had some words about this man in one of the previous sessions, the last time he came up. And here he is again. Can the guy just chill out? All right, you probably can't answer this question, but I will ask it now since we are in the area that I think is this has occurred in. I feel this somewhat of a duty of mine to ask this question because here he goes again. Henry Puharich will be visiting me later this month. What is wrong with this person? Was this entity involved in any of these times of which you have spoken? Why does Don feel such a need to ask all these questions for this Henry guy? I feel like the Henry guy was like pressuring him about it. And poor Don is so nice and sweet that he's going to ask even though he knows Ra's not going to give him any answers. You're quite right in the assumption that we cannot speak we can speak in no way concerning the entity Henry. If you will consider this entity's distortions with regard to what you call proof, you will understand and grasp our predicament. Henry really wants proof of he wants validation of his own experiences, which is completely understandable, don't we all? But I feel like he's going about it in a totally wrong way. Like, he wasn't searching and seeking within. He was like trying to manipulate other people to like give him the answers. So, geez. Okay. Can you tell me what happened to Akhenaten after his physical death? This entity was then put through a series of healing and review of incarnational experience, which is what, you know, half of us do when we pass on, which is appropriate for the third density experience. This entity had been somewhat in the distortions of power, ameliorated by the great devotion to the law of one. This entity thus resolved to enter a series of incarnations in which it had no distortions toward power. So because he was essentially incarnated into the figure of a pharaoh, which of course in this particular Egyptian time is like the highest of the high. I mean, they think of themselves as gods, many of them. He had a lot of distortions toward power, but because he had put so much devotion toward the law of one, that this was kind of negated. However, he did decide to have various incarnations afterwards where he didn't have any distortions toward power. What was the average lifespan in the time of Akhenaten? The average lifespan was approximately 35 to 50 years. There was much disease of the physical complex at that particular time. And, did the math, he died at 36. So that's exactly within the range that Ra says. Can you tell me the reasons for the disease? This is, as we have mentioned before, not particularly informative with regard to the law of one. So Ra's basically like, Dawn, you're wasting your time, but we'll give you the answer anyway. However, the land you know as Egypt at the time was highly barbarous in its living conditions. The river, which you call the Nile, was allowed to flood and recede, providing fertile grounds for the breeding of diseases which may be carried by insects. Although the preparation of foodstuffs allowed diseases to form. There was difficulty in many cases with sources of water, and water which was taken caused disease due to the organisms therein. So their water could get infected, their insects were infected, their food was infected, all because they're trying to grow food by flooding the ground from the Nile. So it's like the Nile is giving them life and giving them death. I was going back to the root of, or thought, which created the possibility of this disease. In general, reduction of thought over the long time on the planet Earth with respect to the understanding of the law of one created a condition for the disease to develop. Is that correct? It is correct and perceptive. You, as questioner, begin now to penetrate the outer teachings. Yay, Dawn. So Dawn was saying, all this disease was happening because there are so many misconceptions, distortions towards the law of one, and because of their barbarism and whatever, you know, all that stuff. And Ra gives Dawn a compliment. Yes, yes. The root cause in this particular society was not so much a bellicose action, although there were, shall we say, tendencies, but rather the formation of a money system and a very active trading and development of those tendencies toward greed and power. Thus, the enslaving of entities by other entities and the misapprehension of the creator with each entity. So it's not necessarily that they wanted to fight with each other. It's the fact that the money system created greed and power, and they started enslaving people. This was the problem. This was the problem. Okay. Why were the people contacted in South America? The entities who walked among those in the South American continent were called by a similar desire upon the part of the entities therein to learn of the manifestations of the sun. They worshipped this source of light and life. Thus, these entities were visited by light beings not unlike ourselves. Instructions were given, and those more accepted and less distorted than others hold on a second. Instructions were given and they were more accepted and less distorted than others. The entities themselves began to construct a series of underground and hidden cities, including pyramid structures. These pyramids were somewhat of a variance from the design that we have promulgated. However, the original ideas were the same, with the addition of the desire of, or intention of, creating places of meditation and rest, a feeling of the presence of the one creator. The pyramids then being for all people, not only initiates and those being healed. So good job, South American folks. Because the Egyptian pyramids were a place for people to become initiated, to become healers, and people to come and to be healed. So there was already like a distortion towards only specific people. And in a lot of ways, it sounds like that's the way that Ra set it up to be. You know, that it was supposed to be for everyone, but it was supposed to be for everyone through the specific set of circumstances of someone become initiated to the law of one so that they would know how to heal people correctly. But the South American pyramids had places where people could just go and meditate and rest and be in the presence of the one creator, and that it wasn't specifically just for initiates and healing, which I feel like a lot of the Southeast Asian temples and pyramids stuff are like that too. So that's interesting, which that doesn't come up in this book yet, but Southeast Asia has a lot of stuff that's very similar too. Okay, they left this density when it was discovered that their plans were solidly in motion and had been recorded. So they felt like they had succeeded, and their stuff had even been recorded. The things they did had been recorded. During the next 3,500 years approximately, these plans became distorted in a state of near completion in many aspects. Therefore, as is the case in all breakings of the quarantine, the entity who is helping the South American entities along the South American ways of the part of the Amazon River went before the Council of the Saturn to request a second attempt to correct in person the distortions which had occurred in their plans. They were granted access, and they returned, and the entity chosen as messenger came among the peoples once more to correct the errors. So stuff was working real good for about 3,000 years, started getting distorted. They decided to come back. Now, in Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Norton, I bring this book up many, many times, there are different variations of the same messenger coming. Viracochas are one of the terms used for them. I believe the entity Quetzalcoatl was also another one, that it's basically like according to Fingerprints of the Gods, it seems like it's all the same person or the same people that are traveling all over Central and South America, helping them with all kinds of technological advancements and ways of being. And I did not look it up to verify the time frame, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to this time frame that Ra is also talking about. So maybe I'll look that up for another later discussion. Okay. Again, all of it was recorded, and the entity rejoined the social memory complex and left your skies. So there is a lot of recorded information about this messenger, like I was just saying. But in our experience, the teachings were, for the most part, greatly and grossly perverted to the extent of actual human sacrifice rather than healing of humans. Thus, the social memory complex is also given the honor duty of remaining until the distortions are worked out of the distortion complex of your people. So once again, humans completely screwed it up, and they started murdering each other for the sake of whatever they thought they were doing. Man. Okay. This is a dumb question, but there was a movie called Battle Beyond the Stars, which I looked it up. It came out in 1980. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. Dawn. Raw, did you go see it in the theaters? I guess you are. It seems to have what you're telling us included in the script. Is that correct? This particular creation of your entities has some distortions of the law of one in its scenario upon your physical plane. Correct. So now I really want to see this movie, Battle Beyond the Stars, because it has a lot of this stuff in it, supposedly. You know, distorted in it as it is. So that's session 23. Let's review. Tons more information about Egypt, more information about the pyramids, more information about South America, and what happened during and after all of those times that entities came to try to assist us, and how badly we all messed it up. So I felt like there was a lot of review in this session, that there was many times, like most of it was stuff that has talked about previously, but it's just more in depth, and there's historical documentation through archaeology and records and whatever that backs up a lot of the stuff that Ross said. The timing is a little bit off, but you know, Ra never actually says like how many years ago they decided to leave Egypt. And if they were there from 8,500 years ago to the time of Akhenaten, which was like 3,500 years ago, roughly, I guess it all kind of lines up. So a lot of review and extended information about the stuff that was previously talked about. So tell me what you guys think, and join the discussion. Add your questions, comments, concerns, complaints, whatever. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget there's a lot more of these discussions that came before it, and there'll be more that come after. And I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.